First thing that I would like to say is that listening to the presentations this morning, there was a number of words which really resonated with me, and I hope if I don't capture them all throughout the presentation, I'll say them here now. And those are things like engagement, convergence, value, culture, innovation, clusters, collaboration, and the one which we've heard quite a bit of this afternoon is patient-centric development and service. I'm very, very pleased to have this opportunity to speak to you. I think that one of the things that we all know in this room is that the pharmaceutical industry and healthcare in general is undergoing monumental change. It's been undergoing monumental change for quite a period of time, but I think we've been more focused on it, particularly in recent years, as the economic challenges we face, not just in Ireland, but throughout the world. And many of the challenges that we face in healthcare, quite frankly, have been ones which we may very well have created ourselves. And I think this cartoon demonstrates the success that we as an industry have had over the years. My son saw this last night and he said, "Is that you, Dad?" And he wasn't too far away. But I think that one of the things which we have seen is over the last 100 years, we've seen a doubling in life expectancy. And in the last 50 years, we've seen a substantial increase in life expectancy across the world. And I think the one thing which we can say is that the development of new medicines has contributed enormously to life expectancy and to the quality of life of mankind over the past 60 years. If you look at this graph here, I mean, what it's showing you here is the global life expectancy since 1960, which I'll openly say is the year I was born, has risen from just over 50 to just under 70. And that there is a very substantial increase. And what we've seen is we've seen different increases around the world. And if you look at, for example, in the developed world, we've seen an average of about 10-year increase since 1960. And it's gone from just over 70 to just over 80. And we see Sweden there at the top. The UK and Ireland is up there very high as well with the United States. But if you look at the so-called second world or developing world, we've seen China go from just over 40 to over 70. So we've seen a 30-year increase in life expectancy. And the one thing which we can say with a large degree of certainty is between 40 and 60% of those gains in life expectancy have been achieved by new innovative medicines. And this here is a quote. I mean, one of the things I've said to somebody earlier on today is that the pharmaceutical industry has been through a golden era in that last 30, 40 years. A lot of the challenges which we've overcome, they were big challenges at the time, but we've overcome a lot of them, particularly in these areas here. So what we've seen is we've seen cardiovascular disease challenge met very well by the pharmaceutical industry. The area of mental illness, which Ambrose mentioned earlier on. We're now into the more difficult areas, but I'm sure we've spoke to the scientists of 30, 40 years ago, they would say these other areas were just as challenging back 30, 40 years ago. But now we're into the area of neurology, we're into the area of oncology, and so those are big challenges. And they have presented big challenges to the pharmaceutical industry in terms of productivity, in terms of cost, in terms of development. I think this here is worth reading, and it comes from that report just earlier on. It says, new drugs confer a number of important benefits: longer life, reduced utilization of hospitals and other medical services, higher productivity, enhanced quality of life. Policies that reduce the number of availability of new drugs deprive society of these benefits. And I think that there is a challenge. And this will come back to something I want to talk about a little bit more later on, is collaboration and cooperation between all stakeholders in society. If we look at the pharmaceutical industry is one of the largest industries, as we all know, in the world today. It had sales last year of $825 billion. It spends approximately $68 billion. That's what the pharmaceutical industry spends. There's about another $30 billion spent by government and various health institutes around the world. And 44% of that is outsourced. The global revenues of my industry, this clinical research industry, is about $28.2 billion right now, and employs around 120,000 people globally. And in Ireland, it's around 2,000 people in that space. This is a slide which I won't spend too much time on. I'm sure everybody in this room has seen this slide. You know, out of every 10,000 molecules, one medicine makes it to the market. And that there is one of the reasons for the huge cost of development, of research and development of new medicines. The figure, as you saw up there, was between 1.3 and 1.8, but other analysis would suggest that in actual fact, in many instances, a lot higher even than that. The rising costs threaten healthcare advances. I think we all know that from a societal perspective. It's very expensive to develop new medicines. Clinical drug development periods are getting longer and longer. The US health, just looking at the US healthcare expenditure in the 10-year period, 11-year period from 2000 to 2011, it's gone from 13.6% to 18.2%. In Europe, it's around 10%. And in Ireland, it's around that, we're around the European average at 9.5%. And in 2012, we'll spend 13.3 billion euros on healthcare in Ireland. So there is a changing new healthcare landscape. And all of these things here are bringing about that change. One of the things we have is a challenging economic environment in which to operate, but we also have the challenge of developing new medicines. It's taking longer to get those medicines to the marketplace, but we also have the aspect of reimbursement, having got those products to the marketplace, is also a challenge. And so, for example, health technology assessment, which was something which 10 years ago wasn't something which pretty much anybody knew anything about, and that there is a focus through all countries today about providing medicines at value for money. And I think that for all stakeholders, that there is a challenge, but it's also an opportunity. And I think that what it means is that we need to get more involvement by all of the stakeholders, including the patient, or in particular the patient. The current landscape for the biopharma industry is a stormy landscape. On the one hand, it has huge costs in terms of developing medicines, and on the other hand, there's a challenge in terms of what can be charged for those medicines. I think it's only appropriate that the biopharma industry should be asked to demonstrate value around medicines. I think we have, but I think, again, it comes back to the metrics, is that we got to use the data, and we also got to look at the product, not just in a clinical setting, but also in a real world setting. A lot of these have been mentioned already, so I won't spend too much time on these. But we also have other factors as well. We have population changes. When I was growing up, the population of the globe, we were told, was 5 billion. As of yesterday, it's 7 point something billion. New technologies, escalating healthcare costs, public expectations, and patient empowerment. That's a good thing. I think that what we do want to see is we want to see more patient engagement in their own health. And it comes back to what Ambrose was speaking about earlier on, whether that's provided in the home by carers or whether it's the patients themselves becoming more involved in their own healthcare. Dr. Google, we're all familiar with Dr. Google. Any medics in the room will say it's somebody they meet pretty much every day of the week as the patient comes in to tell them what's wrong with them and how they should be treated. I think that there is a challenge. Disease areas, personalization of medicine. We've spoken about the global economic environment, market access, and real world analysis, evaluating products, how they perform in the real world, driving improved patient adherence. And somebody talked about better informed patients, better educated patients lead to better outcomes for medicines. Just looking very quickly at the clinical trials world, there's approximately 135,000 clinical trials around the world as we speak. And as you can see, the bulk of those are actually here in North America. About 57% of all clinical trials around the world are in North America, between the US and Canada. Just under 50% in the US and the balance in Canada. Europe, 26%, but 26% in declining. And of course, the growth area is this area here. Just to look very briefly at Europe, we've got currently 691, of which there's approximately 200 open in Ireland at the moment. The UK, 7,000. The bulk of clinical studies within Europe are in the big three, the UK, France, and Germany. Just looking at some numbers, and I know that when some people see numbers coming up, that's the time to turn up, but I think these are worth looking at. If you look at the level of studies happening around the world, just in the number, you have 64,000, almost 65,000 in the US, 10,000 in Canada, Germany, and so on. Just looking at countries that are a similar size to Ireland, some of them are a little bit bigger. You look at Denmark, almost 3,500 is against 691 in Ireland. Sweden, 2,800, and Norway just under 2,000. I thought it was worth looking at the United States, which is the dominant country in the area of clinical research. And if you just look at the states, these are the big states, and as you can see, California, Texas, New York, and Florida, pretty much all of these are bigger than most of the countries around the world. If you look at the small states, and this here is, I think, is worth comparing for Ireland, is you have Rhode Island with a population of 1 million, 2,292. New Hampshire, 1,392. And again, this is the comparable number for Ireland. And these numbers are very, very substantially bigger than Ireland. So there's a lot of clinical research happening in North America. And I think the question we need to ask is, why is Ireland and Europe, for that matter, not doing a little bit better? Okay, I think that one of the things which I would challenge is an improvement in stakeholder cooperation and collaboration. Heard a lot of talk this morning, and I don't doubt that a lot of cooperation and collaboration happens, but we need to do that to an even greater level within, and Ireland has an opportunity in that space. We're a relatively small country. People know each other very, very well. They talk about being, 5 degrees removed or whatever it is. I always say in Ireland it's about 1. Pretty much everybody knows everybody else. So we need greater cooperation between all of these stakeholders, and in particular we need it with the patient. The health service, for example, in the United States and in Canada, it's an integral part of medical education, is clinical research. That's one of the reasons why we see a huge amount of clinical research happening. Most of the specialists in this country, or a vast majority of specialists, have trained in the United States, and they've done a lot of clinical research in it. So they're very, very well trained in this space. They know how it works. But then they come back here, and quite frankly, the infrastructure and the environment is not conducive to clinical research. And I think that we need to improve it. There is a lot of people, there's a lot of aspiration, there's a lot of desire to see Ireland as a leading centre for clinical research. But I think the one thing which we should recognise is pretty much, 49 of the 50 states in the United States want to see themselves as being leading centres of clinical research. So we're competing, and we're competing with Singapore, and we're competing with continental Europe, and we're competing with the UK. So if we want to play in this space, then we need to take a policy decision that this is a space that we want to be in, and we need to be excellent in what we do in that space. Ruth said earlier on, we can't be great at everything. But believe me, this is one space which we can be great at. We have a cluster. We have most of the major pharmaceutical companies in the world with facilities and manufacturing facilities and operations in Ireland. So the customers are here. The opportunity is here. And the challenge now is for government to actually take a policy decision that we want to be involved in this space. And we're going to actively do more than just have an aspiration to be leaders in that space. Just to tell you a little bit about our organisation, Quintas, as Ina said, is the world's largest pharmaceutical research company, or clinical research company. And essentially what we do is, in the first sentence here, it's a service organisation that provides support to the pharmaceutical and biotechnology industry in the form of research and development service, outsourced on a contract basis. And I just want to show you what that industry looks like. Essentially, this is the part where pharma and biotechnology companies played a big part here, and this is where we then provide the services throughout the continuum, right from phase 1 right through to commercialization. And the new space, which I spoke about earlier on, is the whole area about real world data. It's about evaluating products in the real world and comparing that against the clinical setting. And that there is something which is happening in many, many countries. In some countries what we have is we have a situation where there is provisional reimbursement based on a HTA then carried out on the basis of real-world data over a 2 or 3 year period. Just looking at the industry in terms of its growth, this industry was virtually non-existent 30 years ago, and in 2010 it was worth 22.8 billion, and it's forecasted by ACRO to grow to 43.87. This is just another figure from Business Insights. They're showing it at the moment valued at 28.2 billion, to grow to 42.6 billion between now and 2016. So what we're seeing is a significant proportion of R&D budgets are spent with the services of CRO companies around the world. As I said, it's in 20 billion in 2010 and forecast to double within the next 3 or 4 years. This is the number of employees. The number of employees since 2008 has more or less doubled from 66,000 to 121,000, and that's forecasted to grow to 161,000 by 2015. Again, I won't spend too much time on this here. Essentially what we're looking at here is, again, the continuum of services along in the development of products. And again, health economics and outcomes research, which wouldn't have been there even 2 or 3 years ago, is now part of the offering. The challenge to reinvent healthcare, clinical drug development, healthcare delivery, and health expenditure. That there is the challenge, and they're all coming together. We really have, almost like the east coast of the US earlier this week, almost a perfect storm in that we have the challenge of rising costs, and on the other hand, we have the pressures of downward prices. And that there is a challenge for pharma, it's a challenge for the patient, and it's a challenge for society. And going deeper, going broader. I think this is what we're looking at in terms of evidence-based medicine. Going deeper is greater understanding of disease causality. And going broader means evaluating on a longer period of time, looking at the performance of medicines and devices in the real world. And also using data. I think one of the challenges which we're seeing is, the phrase is data everywhere. What are we doing about it? And I think that, data not properly analysed, not properly understood, is worse than useless. It actually can be potentially dangerous. And I think it's important that we as a country become first of all, capture the data, analyse the data, and then make policy decisions based on good data. I think we've been poor in that space, to be quite frank. We haven't been as good as we could be. I think the United States certainly has been at the forefront of that for many, many years. But we're also seeing Europe going ahead of us in this space. And I think that that's a challenge for us, is to capture the data, capture patient data, and then use that data to make good policy decisions. Okay, the emergent models, and this is the word I saw earlier on, is research care convergence, evidence-based drug design, evidence-based therapeutic evaluation, evidence-based policy and economics, and they're all connected. Healthcare must measure standards of care and costs and then exceed them, or pay more and more for suboptimal solutions. And that there is the challenge. Collect the data, analyze the data, and then make sense of that data. This is the same thing again, it's therapeutic innovation, patient care, and health management. This here is a big, big focus for all of us. Cost effectiveness, value-based pricing, improved resource allocation, and prevention and positive health behavioural programs. I think that there again comes back to patient education. The patient, of course, is at the centre of everything that we do. Regardless of how far back, we speak to new staff coming in every month, and we say, regardless of how far back you are in the chain, what you do today has an impact on the patient. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe it's 10 years' time, but it will have an impact on the patient. So what you do is important. What we do as an industry is important. But it's also, there's no point in coming up with the panacea if nobody's prepared to pay for it. So value-based pricing and value-based research is very, very important. And again, it comes back to Liam's first presentation today. It's not just about the price. It's about improving process. It's about doing better for less. And that there's the challenge for all of us within society today. Prevention and positive health behaviours. That there really, again, is about patient education, about patient information, and not Dr. Google. Dr. Google gives you a lot of good information, but you've got to have the understanding to separate the fact from the fiction. And there's a lot of fiction on Dr. Google, as we know. So my message today really is about how do we develop Ireland as a centre of research and development? How do we develop Ireland as a centre for clinical excellence in clinical research? Cultural change in medical education, I think that there is a challenge. I think, quite frankly, unless we make that change during the medical education process, we're not going to see the revolution which we want. We'll see a very slow evolution, or worse still, we won't see an evolution at all. Greater stakeholder cooperation, and I know there's a lot of that happening right now, but I think we need to see an increase in that. I think there needs to be an understanding from all stakeholders of the challenge each other faces, and understanding that there is a common and shared goal among all, and that there is about improved patient care, about better products that will improve the health and improve the quality of life of patients. Evidence-based, value-based medicine, we talked about that earlier on. Real world, that there has disappeared up there. It just says real world research outcomes. I think that there is something which is a challenge and an opportunity for everybody. It's something which we have to do. It makes sense to look at a product in the real world and say, just how good is it? If you have a great product, but only 25% of patients are taking it as indicated, then you're not going to get the outcomes which you would expect from the clinical research. So again, it does come back to patient education. I think an informed patient, an engaged patient, leads to better outcomes. And so the challenge for us and the challenge for them is to be better engaged, to better understand. The clinical research is part of what every one of us do every day of the week. Talk to your friends and colleagues outside of the industry, and they pretty much don't know what clinical research is. You talk to people in the United States, you talk to people in certain parts of Europe, they know clinical research, they know the benefits of it. And we as an industry need to enhance the knowledge of patients about what clinical research is. And to be quite frank, we also need to do that in relation to healthcare professionals as well. And that's pretty much me. Thank you very much. And I've got 54 seconds left.